Exodus chapter 33 tonight. Exodus chapter 33. And this will be my last class tonight, and I'm not celebrating. We've been together in this study for 2 quarters, and we have plowed through the Exodus, and we have carefully gone through. Our purpose, my purpose, has been to try to re-examine everything, turn over every rock, and the wonderful thing about studying this book is that it is one of the most attacked books in the Bible. Those who don't believe in God, who ridicule the Bible, who wish to reject the teaching of God in the Bible, delight in ridiculing this book because it has such a clear supernatural revelation about God. The ways in which God revealed himself are so undeniably the work of our Creator. It either is true or it's not true. And those arrogant fools who pretend that it's the work of men and prefer to examine all of this from the high and mighty point of view of it being the work of men and where did it come from and how did they come to these conclusions, as if it had to be the work of these ancient scribes hundreds of years later than the fact. And they give us the documentary hypothesis that's in all of your modern commentaries and reference works, and they are so smart. They are such fools. But the fact is, the glory is in the simple text, the way it's written. And when Jesus came, he was not embarrassed to quote freely from the books of Genesis and Exodus and throughout the Scriptures. And Jesus himself walked upon this earth, and he died and was raised and left us abundant evidence for that. Now, what I'd like to do, rather than spend all my time talking about the evidences for this, I'd like us to first start in 1 Corinthians 3, because what we're going to read tonight in chapter 33 of Exodus is referred to in 1 Corinthians 3 and in Hebrews 3. Two texts. And I'm not spending much time there, just to let you be aware that to understand 2 Corinthians 3 and Hebrews 3, these Exodus 33 will help us a great deal. Okay. In 2 Corinthians 3, he says, let me drop down. Well, I'll have to go ahead and read the chapter. I'll read it rapidly. He says, are we beginning to commend ourselves again, or do we need, as some do, letters of recommendation? Clearly, Paul is having to defend his apostleship and his work against those who were scoffing at his credentials. He said, you yourselves are our letter of recommendation, written on our hearts to be known and read by all. And you show that you are a letter from Christ, delivered by us, written not with ink, but with the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of human hearts. The point he's making is that their very lives were evidence that his work was legitimate, because they were a fulfillment of the prophecies of Ezekiel 36 and also of Exodus 33, as we'll see in just a minute. The fact was, he's going to contrast the tender hearts of the Christians with the hardened hearts of the unbelieving Jews of his time. Ezekiel had prophesied that the Messianic people, that is, when Christ would come, the true disciples of Christ, the true heirs of Abraham, would have hearts of flesh and not hearts of stone. That was a prophecy of Ezekiel 36. Now, Paul is going to use that and then bring forward the idea these unbelieving Jews kept talking about Moses and the law and the law and the law as if they were champions of the law, and they were not. They were misusing Moses. But he said, now your hearts are like those tables of stone. Okay, now let's keep reading verse 4. Such is the confidence that we have through Christ toward God. Not that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant. That's from the prophecy of Jeremiah 31, the prophecy of a new covenant. Not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Now he's going to explain what he means of the letter, the engraved letter on the tablets of stone. He says, now if the ministry of death, carved in letters on stone, that's the letters he's talking about that kill. The letters carved in stone, that is the Ten Commandments, that is this system that the unbelieving Jews were advocating, which did not have the blood of Christ. It could not save anybody, okay? It was a ministry of death. He calls it that. The ministry of death, carved in letters of stone. But it came with such glory. That's what we're going to read about tonight. That the Israelites could not gaze at Moses' face because of its glory, which was being brought to an end. Okay? We're going to watch that this glory that Moses had began to fade. Even as they were watching. We'll see that in chapter 33. So he put a veil on his face. We're going to read about that right now. He says, will not the ministry of the Spirit, that is the new covenant, have even more glory? For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, that is the two tables of stone, the ministry of righteousness must far exceed it in glory. Indeed, in this case, what once had glory has come to have no glory at all, because of the glory that surpasses it. For if what was being brought to an end came with glory, much more will what is permanent have glory. Because the new covenant was permanent, but the old covenant, that is, it became old because Jeremiah prophesied of a new covenant. Hebrews 8 makes that argument. Verse 13. Once Jeremiah said a new, he suddenly created an old covenant. So therefore we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. And when it's called old, therefore it's become obsolete, ready to fade away. Now that's his argument here as well. Now, verse 12. Since we have such a hope, we are very bold, not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face so that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end. But their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the old covenant, all right, listen to his language there. Where'd that come from? The old covenant. It came from Jeremiah 31. It wasn't in the Old Testament. It wasn't called that then. Jeremiah called it, he said there was going to be a new covenant. But once he said that, now the first covenant becomes old. So he's using the language that you have also in Hebrews 8:13. For when they read today the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, because only through Christ is it taken away. That is, they cannot understand what they're reading about the law of Moses because it's fulfilled in Christ. Jesus said he didn't come to abolish the law, but to what? Fulfill it. He came to fulfill it. You don't understand the law of Moses until you understand the new covenant of Christ that fulfilled it. All of his purposes and plans. So, the veil's taken away only in Christ. Yes, to this day, whenever Moses is read, the veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Is that a miracle? No, it's not a miracle. It's whenever you hear the gospel, you open your ears, you open your eyes, and now you understand. Now you hear the gospel, and you understand the old covenant. It's in context. It all makes sense now. He says, now, the Lord is the Spirit. Where the Spirit, the Lord is, there is freedom. Freedom from what? Freedom from the bondage of the old covenant, as well as all of the penalties of what the old covenant had bound on them. He said there's freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, not like Moses, but unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord. Okay? We're beholding the glory of the Lord. Now watch him. It's beautiful. It's my favorite verse. Okay? Beholding the glory of the Lord. What are we looking at? What's the glory of the Lord? Is that just an aura? Now, in the case of Moses, there was a physical glory, right? Was there a physical glory around Jesus? Do we see Jesus physically? What do you look like? We don't have a clue what he looked like. We don't have any physical description of Jesus. The only description we have of Jesus is what? His character. That's all we know about Jesus. The only thing we know about the glory of Jesus is his teachings. That's what we know about him. Now, so when we see Jesus, we're talking about looking into his teachings, are we not? All right? He says, we all with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed into the same image from one degree of glory to another. For this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. You see, you have the progressive growth of glory. You are being transformed into the same image, more and more glorious as you become more like him. And there's you have 2 Peter 1 and verse 4. We have become partakers of the divine nature. Read verses 3 and 4. And all of that context, all that you have in that paragraph in the first chapter of 2 Peter is talking about what the precious promises of God that are designed to help us become partakers of the divine nature. And the divine nature is glorious. We see that and we are transformed. James chapter 1 talks about looking into the perfect law of liberty and being transformed. Again, same idea. Not being a forgetful, what is it? Forgetful hearer, but a doer of the word. Same idea. It's just different words, but it's exactly the same idea. We are transformed. Now, I'm not going to spend time here. I'm going to Hebrews 3 right quick, and then we'll go to our text. Hebrews chapter 3. Here we're comparing Jesus to Moses. Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses also was faithful in all God's house. For Jesus has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as the builder of a house has more honor than the house itself. For every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all God's house as a servant to testify to the things that were to be spoken later. But Christ is faithful over God's house as a son. And we are his house, indeed, if we hold fast our confidence and our boasting in our hope. So what's the difference between the station of Jesus and Moses?
Jesus was better than Moses.
Okay?
He's a son. Moses.
Both are glorious, right? How is their glory different?
By the same
Both are
token,
faithful.
As a son is greater than the servant.
As a son is greater than the servant. Okay? Son is over the house. Moses is servant in the house. Okay?
Think about the Mount of Transfiguration, where was it Peter suggested the building of 3 tabernacles?
That's it.
Or Moses.
Matthew
He
17.
was glorifying Moses beyond his station.
This is my son. So it is offensive, even blasphemous, to speak of Jesus as being on the level of Moses. Because Jesus is not a servant like Moses. He is the Son of God. So let's go back now to Exodus chapter 33. You know, you have all these old medieval paintings of the Bible characters, and they put these they put these halos on them, and you always wonder where they get that, you know. And all the apostles have these halos on their heads, you know, and they put one on Jesus and on Mary, and all the saints have got halos on them, you know. And I thought that must have been a completely pagan idea, and it pretty much is. But you know, when you read this in Exodus 33, there is a little bit of a foundation for it, is there not? Let's read this in chapter 33. The Lord said to Moses, "Depart, go up from here, you and the people whom you have brought up out of the land of Egypt to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your offspring I will give it, and I will send an angel before you, and I will drive out the Canaanites, the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey. But I will not go up among you, lest I consume you on the way, for you are a stiff-necked people." When the people heard this disastrous word, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. For the Lord had said to Moses, "Say to the people of Israel, you are a stiff-necked people. If for a single moment I should go up among you, I would consume you. Now take off your ornaments, that I may know what to do with you." Therefore the people stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. Now, that introduces the chapter because of what happened in chapter 32. So, what happened in chapter 32? Why is the Lord talking this way? What happened in chapter 32? Golden calf. That says it all. Okay. That's why he said, when they built that, Moses was 40 days up in the mountain after God had shown all of his glory there in chapter 20, what was it, chapter 25? 24? And 24, and had convened the 70 elders and the Aaron and Moses and the priests. and had the covenant meal, and God had shown himself and there on the sapphire pavement, and God in all of his glory, and then called Moses up on the mountain 40 days, and then at the end of 40 days, where's Moses? And then they asked Aaron to make a golden calf. And God says they are a stiff-necked people. That's what this is all about. And God's first impulse was, Moses, step aside. Don't hold me back. I want to consume them. That's all. You know, I've had enough. I've done all I can do. What more could you ask of me? Now, what reasonable argument could you say in rebuttal to God? Could you? I mean, could you say, is there anything else God could have said or done? Any more condescension could God in heaven have done for them? I can't think of anything. But Moses did intercede for them. He pled with them. He made a reasonable argument. And God heard him. And God did not destroy them. But he continues in this vein. He says, okay, I'm going to keep my covenant. But let them be aware, I'm keeping my covenant. That doesn't mean they deserve it. Okay? They are a stiff-necked people. And the people, when they heard it, they mourned. And they ought to have. And they needed to. And you have them very, very duly humbled in verses 7. That sets the stage for their reverence toward Moses. Now, it'd be very easy for us to think of Moses as suddenly ascending to the level of a demigod, and he was not, okay? But God did want them to respect his word as a prophet, as a spokesman. They had to obey these words for their survival, for them to carry out the plan. The plan, as we see here, they had to go to the promised land, and they had to take that land away from the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Who were those people? We've already had all that discussion, haven't we? We talked about them. They were a fierce, well-established people. They had fortified cities. They had giants. They were skilled in battle. It was not going to be an easy thing. Of course, God was going to give them the battle. It was going to be God's battle, but they had to trust in God. They had to be completely loyal. They had to do exactly what God said, exactly when and how God said do it. That required complete faith and confidence in whatever Moses told them to do from God. Now, let's go ahead and read. Verse 7. Now Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp. Now, we don't have a functioning tabernacle yet, I don't think. I don't think it's been set up yet. We have instructions in these verses between. It may have been set up. I don't think so. This is just right after the golden calf incident. This is right after he's come down from the mountain. They haven't had time to do all the construction and everything yet. That's going to happen. So I'm assuming that this tent of meeting is not talking about the tabernacle. This is just a tent that Moses has set up. And they're going to have the Ark of the Covenant and all that worship. And the Lord is going to outline again. He's going to repeat the annual feast days and all that. We're going to have all that further on in the book. But he would take a tent, pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone sought the Lord. Okay, that's the word for Jehovah. They would go out to the tent of meeting, which was outside the camp. Whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people would rise up. Each would stand at his tent door and watch Moses until he had gone into the tent. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent. And the Lord, or Jehovah, would speak with Moses. And when all the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance of the tent, all the people would rise up and worship, each at his tent door. Thus, the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. When Moses turned again into the camp, his assistant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, would depart from the tent. Now, before I get into this, God would speak to Moses face to face. What does that mean?
Plainly.
Plain. As friend to friend. Okay? Face to face, as a friend. 1 Corinthians 13. Face to face. You know, we have that question. We talk about we have a song, face to face with Christ my Savior, and we're saying we sing that song to say we will not see Jesus until we're raised in heaven. We see him face to face, and we sing that song, you know, on that basis. I understand that, but it's based on 1 Corinthians 13, and actually I think 1 Corinthians 13 is not saying that. This is talking about what would happen when all of the prophecies were complete. It's talking about the completeness of knowledge, the completeness of the relationship that we would have whenever the knowledge was complete. He said, verse 8, love never ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will pass away. There he's talking about the spiritual gifts that were a part of the first century. Whenever the apostles had their gifts, then they would lay their hands on others, and they had the gifts of prophecy. For we know in part, okay, their knowledge was partial because of the gifts that were partial, that would impart gifts, part here and a part there. We prophesy in part, he says. But when the perfect comes, that word perfect now is the idea of completeness. The partial will pass away. Now, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. The contrast between the partial and the complete. Now, okay, during the time of being partial, incomplete, now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Okay? Using that terminology that you have with Moses and God, face to face would be friend to friend. Frankly, openly, completely. You remember the promise that Jesus made to the apostles in John 16? He said, he, when the Spirit of truth comes, he will guide you into what? All the truth. Okay? They didn't have all the truth yet. But ultimately, he said, when the Holy Spirit is through with his work, he said, you will have all of it. And when you have all of it, then it will be complete. And you have that language here. God did not, he explains further, God did not speak to Moses in mysteries or in visions. He spoke plainly as a man speaks to his friend, face to face. This is repeated more than once. When Moses turned into the camp, verse 12. Moses said to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you have said, I know you by name, and you have also found favor in my sight. Now therefore if I have found favor in your sight, please show me now your ways, that I may know you in order to find favor in your sight. Consider too that this nation is your people." And he said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." What is Moses asking for? He's wanting to know something, is he not? He's wanting to know more. Moses is wanting to have complete understanding of what God's plans might be for them and for him. "My presence will go with you. I will give you rest." And he said to him, "If your presence will not go with me, do not bring us up from here. For how shall it be known that I have found favor in your sight, I and your people? Is it not in your going with us, so that we are distinct, I and your people, from every other people on the face of the earth?" There was a doubt about that, was there not? Because the Lord had said, "Move aside, Moses, I want to wipe this people off from the face of the earth." Is it true now that this people is your people? The Lord said to Moses, "This very thing that you have spoken, I will do for you have found favor in my sight, and I know you by name." I want you to keep that language in mind, because this becomes important throughout the Bible, all the way to the end. In the New Testament, the idea of knowing you by name. Knowing the name of God. Knowing each other. This is the language of Jesus in the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, and in the letter of John. I know you, you know me. But if you don't listen to me, if you don't do what I say, you don't know me. That's the language of Jesus. I know you, he said, by name. Moses said, "Please show me your glory." And he said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you." Okay, I want you to remember that. Jesus makes a very good point, a very important point about that word goodness. Now, I'm not going to argue with you over how we use the word good, and I understand the word good is used even in the Bible and other places in a casual way. But here, this is used in a very specific way. And you remember when Jesus, the rich young ruler, came before him and called him good master and the Lord of beauty? Remember that? Okay. He said, "Don't call me good. There's only one good, and that's the God in heaven." He said, "I will make all my goodness pass before you, and will proclaim before you my name." The Lord, no, Jehovah. In this case, putting the word Lord here doesn't make any sense at all. Let's go ahead. Put the word Jehovah here. "And I will be gracious to whom I will be gracious, and I will show mercy to whom I will show mercy." And he said, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." And the Lord said, "Behold, there is a place by me where you shall stand on the rock. And while my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock, and I will cover you with my hand until I pass by. Then I will take away my hand, and you shall see my back, but my face shall not be seen." I don't know how to answer that question. Why could he not be seen without dying? Except perhaps man is mortal. Man, since his sin in the garden, is corruptible. And 1 Corinthians 15, we shall be raised immortal. And when we are immortal, then we can be in God's presence. Perhaps that's the idea. I don't know. Yes.
Yeah, and it seems like the manifestation here that God's talking about, you can't, I think it's the idea, you can't behold me in the fullness of my glory.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's about, because in Exodus 24, they beheld God. I mean,
Right.
that's the passage when
They sure beheld something, for sure.
It says, the scripture says they beheld God.
That's
So it's not an absolute statement. There's
Right.
something about the way he was going to manifest even here as opposed to Exodus 24.
Absolutely.
That it's like,
There's something
not,
different.
not even you can handle
Yeah.
this.
There's definitely a difference, and it's we are to take from this something about the glory of God that man was able to behold. And there was something here unique about what God was going to display for Moses. And it's clearly something that was very unique to Moses' experience, because chapter 34 then goes on to talk about this proximity of Moses to God caused his skin to shine. Okay? Now let's go ahead and read that. Chapter 34, because our time is running out. The Lord said to Moses, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you broke. Be ready by the morning, and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai, and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. Let no flocks or herds graze opposite that mountain. So Moses cut 2 tablets of stone like the first, and he rose early in the morning and went up on Mount Sinai as the Lord had commanded him, and took in his hand 2 tablets of stone. The Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there and proclaimed the name of Jehovah. Now watch this. Notice how he proclaims. This is Jehovah proclaiming his name to Moses as he said he would do here in chapter 33 and verse 20. Here's what he does. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, Jehovah, Jehovah, okay? The being, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. That's that word mercy. Goodness and kindness and fullness of goodness. Faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands. Forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty. Visiting iniquity of the fathers on the children and on the children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. That's how he proclaimed his glory to Moses. Okay? That's the words he used. And Moses quickly bowed his head toward the earth and worshiped. And he said, if now I have found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. I'd like you to see how much that word translated steadfast love is repeated here. Jesus also is the one who repeats that in the New Testament as what he demands of us. It's the word for mercy. It's the word chesed in the Hebrew language. And as I say, it's a difficult word to translate. It's a huge word. It includes mercy. It's the generosity of kindness extended to others. It's the word that's reflected in the parable of the Good Samaritan. It's an extension of the word love. It's an extension of the idea of forgiveness. But that is the heart of God that he demands that we learn to express to our neighbor. And so in verse 10, and he said, "Behold, I am making a covenant before all your people. I will do marvels such as have not been created in all the earth and any nation, and all the people among whom you shall see the work of the Lord, for it is an awesome thing that I will do with you. Observe what I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and Jebusite. Take care lest you make a covenant," so on. Now, drop down to verse 29. You have an enumeration there of the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, and of the Sabbath day, and of the law about the blood of sacrifice. Again, they were not to boil a young goat in its mother's milk. Is thrown in there. The Lord has his reasons. And verse 29. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the testimony in his hand, as he came down from the mountain, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone, because he had been talking with God. Aaron and all the people of Israel saw Moses, and behold, the skin of his face shone. And they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called them, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him, and Moses talked with them. Afterward, all the people of Israel came near, and he commanded them all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face. And whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with them, he would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out, he told the people of Israel what he was commanded. The people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. And Moses would put the veil over his face again until he went in to speak with him. Now that's the context of 2 Corinthians 3. And what was Paul's point about that? Why did he veil his face? Why was his face shining?
Because he'd been in the presence of God.
He was in God's presence. Was it glorious? Yes, it was. It was a glorious thing. Undeniable truth. Was it glorious for Moses? Yes, it was. It was a glorious thing. Everything about it was glorious. Well, the Word of God that he received was glorious. But by comparison to the New Covenant, the New Covenant surpasses it in glory, because that glory was fading. He placed a veil over his face, and he said the parallel to that is that the unbelieving Jews of Jesus' day had a veil over their hearts. They had hardened their hearts. The very Son of God, the Son, not the servant, the Son over the house of God, had come from heaven to this earth, and they couldn't see him, and they couldn't hear him, and they had a veil over their hearts, and they had hearts as hard as the stones, the 2 tablets of stone. And so what you have is a comparison between the two, utilizing the language of Exodus 33, Ezekiel 36, Jeremiah 31, all of them being brought together. And it's a very powerful argument that he makes there, and also in Hebrews, which gives us even greater motivation to say that Hebrews was written by the same author as 2 Corinthians 3. It's the same language. It's the way that Paul wrote. It was the same language, the same terminology. Okay. How about that? We got through it, didn't we? Well, I was rushing through it, and I know that we didn't really need to. But anybody have any questions or comments? I know I rushed through it.
It made me think about that verse in Hebrews 2, where it says we need to pay closer attention to what we have heard so we don't drift away. Because if the message spoken through angels proved to be firm and every violation or disobedience received a just penalty, how will we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? And you're comparing, which is all what Hebrews does, comparing what they received to what we've received.
Yes, it does.
And realizing what we have is far superior. And if he held them accountable for their inferior covenant, how much more us and our far superior covenant.
Well, that's absolutely true. And a part of my purpose for wanting to do this study as well was to help us to try to appreciate what the Apostle Paul was dealing with in his letters, dealing with the unbelief of the Jews. So much of his language in the letters is specifically addressing these very issues. And if you don't understand that, you're going to misconstrue, like 2 Corinthians 3, and go off in a tangent like nearly everybody does, and misunderstand what he's trying to say. Next Wednesday night, we have a new teacher. Brother Rhodes David is going to be teaching for the next quarter. And do you have a...
I'll have some stuff either Sunday or next Wednesday, but we're going to talk about basically wilderness experiences, not only Israel, but Hagar and Ishmael, John the Baptist, Elijah, Jesus, things of going into the wilderness and the things they learned.
So we already have kind of a background. There will be a continuation on some of the things that we're on right now. We have an invitation tonight.
I got you.
Okay, very good. Well, God bless you. Thank you for putting up with me for this past couple of quarters. It's been great. God bless you.